hopefully the air will get, hopefully we've paid our air conditioning bill. Air will work at some point. Okay. I know. What's wrong with it?
This unit's been offline quite a long time.
When are we getting it fixed?
For parts.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Thanks, Craig. Okay. Hi, folks. Hi, our friends in Israel. I hope everyone is good. Do you want to check in and let us know everything okay? Any news? Same. Okay. Okay. So just want to let everyone know, first of all, welcome to Amanda. Good to have you with us. And also want to let you know there's no shir next Tuesday. It's Erev Yontif. It's the eve of the holiday. So I'm assuming that, yeah, I'll be making my cheesecake next week. Maybe. You never know. I'll be making something. Yes, and Elaine, you're going to be speaking 4 a.m. in the all-night learning program. Okay. Okay.
And just a reminder, Elaine is speaking tomorrow at 2 p.m. here as well.
Oh,
So I hope,
okay.
Amanda, I hope that you're not busy with this room tomorrow. Just a little commercial. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, we are, so we're hopefully going to be getting ready for the Shavuot holiday today with some of our discussion. But as we're plodding through the Kuzari, I want us to continue on our discussion that we had started about the sanctity of the Hebrew letters. And of course, this is a discussion that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi embarked on based on his presentation of the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. So what is the book of creation? We talked about it. It's an ancient text that describes in very mystical words how God used the letters of the Jewish alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, to create all of physical reality by using them as the sort of the DNA or the chemical building blocks of all that exists. The Aleph Bet is the periodic table of all of reality. This is Rabbi Yehuda Levi wanted to present this to us ostensibly because he wants to point out that within Jewish tradition, there is a very rich amount of scientific knowledge, albeit very different from the scientific knowledge that was prevalent in the time when he was living, which was in the 12th century. Okay, so it's a question of Jewish pride that he's trying to exhibit. And so we talked last week about the concept of the ascendancy of the Hebrew language. Remember, we talked a little bit about that. We're on page 455. And it was so we talked about the uniqueness of the Hebrew language and what a person should do. We touched a little bit on the idea of prayer in other languages, which is completely acceptable when you don't understand Hebrew. But a person's goal should be to study the Hebrew language because there's an inherent quality to the language of Hebrew because of this mystical content. And we had also mentioned that for the Rambam, for Maimonides, he would not agree with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He doesn't feel that there's anything particularly unique about language per se. Okay, so another point that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi makes is to cite some passages in the Talmud. And he says, and we're just going to learn one sentence today, we add, and so we talked about how the angels are able to heed and detect the Hebrew language more than any other language. So that was one thing we said. And we add, he says, that even the way the Hebrew characters are written in deliberate and meaningful, not just a matter of happenstance, in that even the way the Hebrew characters are written is deliberate and meaningful, not just a matter of happenstance, in that a letter's form is appropriate to the character of that letter. Now, here, what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is referring to is what we would call the morphology, the shape of each and every Hebrew letter of the Aleph Bet has a certain science to it, has a certain deliberateness to it. Just like we learned before that the Hebrew language has a certain deliberateness to it in that it's descriptive of the world around us. Like we gave the example of the word peel, which means elephant, is descriptive of an elephant in a way that the word elephant is not, because it's an English word. But the word peel, which describes an elephant, is descriptive of an elephant. Similarly, the very shape of the Hebrew letters is in some way meaningful and significant. Now, where do we see that? I'm going to show you two passages from the Talmud, and then I want us to have a little bit of a discussion about it, because there's a certain amount of controversy to this idea about the morphology of the letters, which you'll see, which you'll understand very shortly. And some of you may already be aware of it. So what are those two big letters that you see on the top of your screen? So this is Gimel and Dalet. Now these Hebrew letters are written in the way that you would find them in a Torah scroll. It's a little bit different from the way that you see the block letters in modern Hebrew text. But when a scribe writes these letters by hand in a Sefer Torah, this is the way he writes them. You notice that there's like these little crowns on top. They're called tagim. They're little points that represent a beautification of the letters. And there's a tradition for each one of these little crowns. As a matter of fact, the Talmud describes that when Moses went up to heaven to receive the Torah, he noticed that God was binding crowns to the letters. It's one of the things that is described in the Talmud. For the sake of brevity, we're going to dispense with the Aramaic text and we'll just read the English translation. This is from Tractate Shabbat. The sages said to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, young students came today to the study hall and said things the like of which were not said even in the days of Joshua bin Nun, the disciple of Moshe. These children, who only knew the Hebrew alphabet, interpreted the letters homiletically, meaning that if you sound out the name of each letter, the name of each letter has significance. Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, means to learn the wisdom of the Torah. Now, what is the first letter of the alphabet? Aleph. La'alef, or I'm not sure exactly how to conjugate it, but it means to study. It means to learn, to become wise. And bet stands for bina, for understanding. So the reason why the first two letters of the alphabet are called Aleph and Bet is to represent Aleph Bina, study the wisdom that is contained in the Torah. The next two letters, which is what we're going to look at now, Gimel and Dalet. Gimel Dalid means give to the poor. Gamol Dalim. Gimel, from the word gomel, to give, to bestow. Dal is a poor person. So Gimel and Dalid teaches us the second principle of the Torah. So the first principle of the Torah is to become wise through the knowledge of the Torah. The second principle of the Torah is to learn the trait of benevolence and kindness, which are the next two letters of the alphabet. Okay, so why is the leg of the Gimel, and now we get into the morphology, okay? Why is the leg of the Gimel extended toward the Daled? So what does he mean by that? When you look at a chart of the Aleph Bet, the Gimel comes first, and what do we mean by its leg? That's what I'm pointing to here on the screen. Everyone see the leg of the Gimel? And it almost looks like it's, if you could imagine, like in our kids' playbooks, the Gimel has like a little face and it's smiling, and the two legs of the Gimel, the one on the left is sticking out towards the Daled. And remember, what does the letter Gimel represent? Gomel, to bestow. So the Gimel almost represents the giver of charity, and the Daled, which represents the Dal, the poor person, represents the recipient of that charity. Okay? So why is the leg of the Gimel extended toward the Daled? Because it is the manner of one who bestows loving kindness to pursue the poor. Don't wait for them to come to you. You have to stick out your leg and start walking towards the poor, not the other way around. So that's the lesson in the morphology of the letter Gimel. And why is the leg of the Daled extended toward the Gimel? Now, what does he mean by that? Well, take a look at this Daled, okay? And normally when we write the letter Daled, it's a straight line just going completely vertical. But when you write the letter Daled in a Sefer Torah, notice how it's slightly slanted, where the leg is moving a little bit is extended out towards the right. Everyone see that? Okay, so why is that? That's the Gemara's question. It is so that a poor person should make himself available to him who wants to give him charity. Meaning that if you need charity, don't run away. Don't make it hard for the person to bestow charity. Make sure that you sort of allow yourself to receive. And why does the Daled face away from the Gimel? Notice that if you can personify this letter Daled, it's almost got its back to the Gimel. Why does the Daled have its back to the Gimel? It is to teach that one should give charity discreetly so that the poor person will not be embarrassed by him. Gemara does describe a story about a rabbi named Mar Zutra, who used to always leave charity at the door and then run away before the poor person could open the door and discover who it was. And that it goes through a whole story where one day the poor person said, I got to figure out who's leaving me this charity at my doorstep every week. And he decides to hide behind the door. And when he hears someone coming, he opens the door and he runs after Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra runs away. And the Gemara tells a whole story about how he had to go hide in an oven, this one of these big industrial ovens, in order that the guy shouldn't discover, who's his identity. It's a longer story than that. But the point is, when you bestow charity, leave it to the poor person's back. In other words, try to avoid allowing the poor person to see you face to face so that they don't feel embarrassed. So that's another value that is contained in the morphology of the letters of the alphabet. You're not happy?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, this is very nice, but anybody could make up anything about seeing the letters a certain way and saying the Gimel means we should go. And I'm saying, no, it says it's from the children. It seems very childlike to me to be doing this.
Mhm.
And anybody could read in anything. You could make up anything you want from seeing the letters. So what does this prove? Nothing. Or show? What does it show? I don't understand.
So I think your point is very well taken. It's the young students who came up with this idea. And so they were trying to find signification from the shapes of the letters of the alphabet. Is it possible that they were just creating this as a mnemonic device to help them understand? From what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, he says that there was a built-in wisdom in the way that these letters were structured in the first place. And the fact that it is called Gimel Daled, that's pretty unusual. Gomel Dalim, it sounds very, there seems to be some kind of connection there.
I'm sure you could think of 100 different combinations.
Okay, go ahead.
Not me, but.
No, but Gimel Gomel, it's the same word. Daled, Dalim, it's the same, those are the same words. So yes, I mean, you could probably come up with other mnemonic connections, but the Talmud says that this is part of the significance of these letters, and that perhaps maybe what one of the lessons of the Talmud is that nothing is arbitrary in the way that we do things, and that in Judaism, even the shape of the letters and the names of the letters, we can learn lessons from. It is perhaps somewhat childish in its approach, but nonetheless, there's a value to it, right? You're still not happy. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. Well, then you may not be happy with the next piece of Talmud.
What I'm saying is, it's not that you can't learn lessons from the way the letters are, but we don't know that that's necessarily why Hashem made the letters like that.
We don't. You're absolutely right. I'm going to present to you an even bigger challenge, which is what is the technical name for the shapes of these letters? In other words, this whole alphabet that we're looking at right now, it has a certain name in the Talmud. It's called Kitav Ashurit. Have you ever heard that term before? Assyrian script is really its technical terminology. We know from archaeological evidence that these were not the original shapes of the letters as they were given to ancient man in the times of the giving of the Torah 2,500 years ago. No, more, what am I talking about? 3,000, over 3,300 years ago. We know that these were not the shapes of the letters. They were much more primitive in their appearance, and it looks completely different. As a matter of fact, let me just bring up my screen for you so you can take a look. Ancient Hebrew text. Go ahead.
I think the question was it by design, or were the letters this way, and then the rabbis were looking for some explanation of how.
Right. Right. Okay, so I'm going to show this on the screen. Let me just share this for the people who are in TV land. Here, just give me 1 second. Yeah, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Okay, so what we're studying now is what's called Kitav Ashurit, the Assyrian script. That's a Gimel, that's a Dalet. Now look at the original Hebrew, ancient Hebrew text. These letters look very, very different from the way that we have their morphology today. I don't know that you could necessarily use the same argument of Gomel Dalim with the ancient Gimel and the ancient Dalet. And so the question therefore becomes, how do you reconcile what the Talmud is teaching here?
Well, what is the point of reading into those letters if they're not even the letters of Torah was
If they're not even the original letters? And it also raises the question, when we write a Torah scroll today, it has to be so exactly written. But if if the letters were man-made, then how do you reconcile that if we believe that this was a tradition passed down to us from Sinai, exactly how the letters are supposed to be written, when we have archaeological evidence that the ancient letters were completely different? So how do we reconcile that? Okay, so there are a number of different approaches. The Rambam was aware, Maimonides was aware that there was an ancient script called Kitav Ivri, called Hebraic script. And he was aware that historically it preceded Kitav Ashurit. But he was of the opinion that the Assyrian script even predated the more primitive Hebraic text, but it was not well known to most people. And it only became proliferated later on in a later time in history. I'm not sure if you take a look, this Chabad.org quotes all of the different opinions in the Talmud. Mar Zutra said originally the Torah was given to Israel in Hebrew letters and in the sacred Hebrew language. Later in the times of Ezra, the Torah was given in Ashurite script and the Aramaic language. Finally, they selected for Israel the Ashurite script and the Hebrew language, leaving the Hebrew characters and the Aramaic language for the commoners. In any event, you see, and then the Talmud goes on, there are different opinions for this. But one thing is clear, is that at some point, there was a prophetic transmission that the letters should be in the shape that we have them today. Whether it was originally given to Moses at Sinai, or whether it was given to a later prophet, and maybe Moses had it as an esoteric tradition, but did not pass it down to the people. Remember, we've talked about before how at the time of the giving of the Bible, of the Torah, there was a certain primitive nature to all of mankind. And there were certain ideas that early man simply was not ready to process. Man simply didn't have the tools to be able to very carefully stylize the writing that we have today. And so therefore, there's an evolutionary process to even the shape of the letters. But that doesn't negate their legitimacy. It doesn't negate the fact that they were passed down through a prophetic revelation. Okay, so that's at least our tradition as far as these letters are concerned. Go ahead.
Rashi's lettering fit into all this?
That's a good question. It's really actually not Rashi's lettering. It's called Rashi's lettering because a publisher at some point used that lettering as far as Rashi script, but it comes from the medieval period. That's clearly a fabricated lettering. Okay. Yeah, they made us learn it. I know. Okay. That doesn't have any sanctity at all. But so getting back to our text for today, if you don't find significance in the morphology of the letters, you're not a heretic. I don't know. I just don't know what to tell you. I'm just sharing with you a piece of the Talmud, and basically it just says that there's nothing arbitrary, and that the way that the letters are shaped can teach us profound lessons about reality, about the human condition, and so forth. Let's take a look at 3 other letters, and then we'll be done for today. Chet, He, and Yud. The letters Chet, He, and Yud are the topic of the next piece of the Talmud from Tractate Menachot. And it says, Rava explains, they would put a hump-like stroke on the roof of the letter Chet. Everyone see the letter Chet? That's clearly not like the letter Chet that we write in block letters. It's basically 2 Zions connected by a roof. You see that? And that's actually how it's written in a Torah scroll. Okay? As if to thereby say, the Holy One, blessed is He, lives, Chai, from the letter Chet, in the heights of the universe. Sort of, this is the roof where God abides, and that's a reference to God Himself. So you're supposed to think about that when you look at the letter Chet. Next, let's talk about the letter He. This is now the next topic of discussion. They would suspend the left leg of the letter He. When we say they would suspend, it means the letter He has this little leg on the left side that is disconnected from the rest of the letter. So the letter He, in essence, is the letter Daled with a little upside down Yud on the left bottom part of it. Okay, everyone see that? Okay, good. So what is the suspended upside down Yud in the letter He? As Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya asked Rabbi Ami, what is the meaning of that which is written, Bitchu v'Hashem adei ad, ki b'chka Hashem tzur olamim. Trust in the Lord forever, for in the Lord bika, biyah, is God, an everlasting olamim, rock. Rabbi Ami said to him, anyone who puts their trust in the Holy One, blessed is He, will have Him as his refuge in this world and in the world to come. Because the word olamim in the worlds, these letters Yud and He that constitute the word Yah are referring to the 2 worlds that the Holy One, blessed be He, created. One with the letter He and one with the letter Yud. God created 2 worlds. He created the physical realm, and He created something that we call Olam Haba, the world to come. And one was created with the letter Yud, or using the morphology of the letter Yud, and the other one was created with the letter He. And for what reason was this world, this physical world, created, fashioned after the letter He? It is because the letter He, which is open at its bottom, again, now take a look at the letter He, it has an open bottom, has a similar appearance to a portico, which is open on one side. Now, what do we mean by a portico? A portico is like an alcove. It's a room which has 3 walls, and the 4th wall is completely open. Okay, so what is that supposed to signify? And it alludes to this world where anyone who wishes to leave may leave, i.e., every person has the ability to choose to do evil and fall out of the world. In other words, the way that the Talmud describes the existence in this world is like a person who's treading water. You can either sink or you can swim. And anyone who chooses to just give up sinks through the bottom of the letter Hey, which is open on the bottom. It is, and what is the reason that the left leg of the letter Hey is suspended, is not joined to the roof of the letter? Notice that there's this little aperture over here on the left side between the top and the little upside down yud. What is the reason for that? So the Talmud says, it is because if one repents, he is brought back in through the opening at the top. In other words, there's always redemption possible. You can fall through the bottom of the letter Hey, but you can always come back if you want to rehabilitate yourself. There's always an opportunity for rehabilitation and for redemption. So the Talmud then asks, but why not let him enter through the same way that he left? Why do you need to create a second aperture to let the person who fell out come back in? Why not let the person come in the same way that he fell out? So the Talmud answers, it is because, that would not be effective, since one requires assistance from heaven in order to repent, in accordance with the statement of Reish Lakish, who says, concerning one who comes in order to become pure, he is assisted from heaven, as it is written, but to the humble he gives grace. So what the Talmud essentially answers is that a person who falls off the wagon, so to speak, falls out from the bottom, right? And therefore, fails in life and wants a second chance to be able to come back. You can only come back through a second aperture, because if you try to come back the same way that you came in, it's not going to work. Now, what does the Talmud mean by that statement? The Talmud says, you can't, and this is, by the way, discussed in the book Tomer Devorah, the date palm of Deborah, that which is an important classic work. But the explanation to this idea of the letter Hey is that if a person, let's say a person is an alcoholic, and they basically fail in their alcoholism, so that would be signified by he's fallen out, he's fallen off the wagon, right? Now, how do you come back in? How do you rehabilitate yourself? You can't just say, I'm going to go back to the same thing that I was before. Because chances are, if you try to rehabilitate yourself and do the same things that you did before, you're just going to fall again. So what do you need to do? You need to reinforce your behavior. So if every day on my way home, I would walk past the bar, I can't do that anymore. I have to change my behavior and make sure that when I come back, I'm ready to come back, I enter into a different aperture. I enter into a different lifestyle to prevent me from falling out the second time. That's what is all signified in the letter Hey. It represents that we live in a world where people are placed in a world where they are encouraged to do good, but we can all fall out and really just literally just fail, right? But if we want to come back, there's always redemption possible, but you have to do it in such a way that with behavior modification, you make sure that you don't make the same mistake a second time. Okay, so that's what's taught with the letter Hey. And finally, because it's late, I don't want to take much more time, the Gemara asks, why is the world to come created in the fashion of the letter Yud, which is the tiniest of all letters? It is because the righteous of the world are so few that not everyone is going to be able to have a great portion in the world to come. Even though the Talmud says that all Israel have a portion in the world to come, nonetheless, it's something that to get a special portion in the world to come, it's reserved for a choice few select people who really live exemplary lives. Okay, so I'm not going to get into more detail of that, especially because Rachel is unhappy with it. But I will say this: there is value to trying to find significance in even the most trivial detail, seemingly trivial detail. That's the exercise that we're discovering today. That's perhaps something that I believe that Rebbe Yehuda Levi is trying to transmit. When he talks about the specialness of the Hebrew letters, he's telling us that even the shape of the Hebrew letters has significance as well. Okay, before we go on to our next topic, anyone have any questions, comments?
So every gimel in the Torah has that crown on it?
Yes, every gimel in the Torah has that crown on it. Yeah. Yes, Elaine.
It's the point of that there, some words were a very little change.
Oh, I listened to Rabbi Corruption.
Hold on just 1 second online. We have someone here asking.
Hallel and Hilul, Achilul, it's just the difference between a hay and a chet.
Yes, yes, there are many, many word plays. Like another example is chametz and matzah, right? Matzah has the exact same letters as the word chametz, with the exception that one is a hey and one is a chet. And the hey and the chet are very similar letters, as we've just seen by the Talmud. Their pronunciation is very similar as well. So yes, sometimes just slight variations can change a word meaning from its meaning to the opposite of its meaning. Correct. Yes.
You said at the beginning that the Rambam doesn't think there's anything special about the Hebrew language. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I can, but it's late. So maybe why don't we leave that for 2 weeks from now? I years ago, I gave a presentation about the dispute between the Rambam and the Ramban about why Hebrew is called the holy language. So maybe I'll revisit that with you next time, okay? And by the way, the shir that I plan to give the night of Shavuot, the midnight class that I'm going to be giving, is about the occult and whether or not there's something about magic within Judaism. It relates to the sort of the mystical content of the letters, the language, and so many other things contained within Judaism. Okay, so let's go on to Parshat Bamidbar. Okay, the name of the Devar Torah for Parshas Bamidbar is like sand on the beach. The Haftorah that we're going to be reading this Shabbos is from the book of Hosea.
I counted it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone have a question they wanted to ask? I apologize. I'm sorry. Did someone want to ask something? Okay, if not, I'm going to mute you all, and then you can always unmute yourself later. Okay. V'hayam mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam. That the number of the children of Israel will be like the sand on the beach. Asher lo yimad v'lo yisafer. That cannot be measured or counted. Okay, now the topic of the Haftorah is always supposed to be resonant with the Torah reading. What is our Torah reading all about this Shabbos? We're going to read about the census that is taken of the Jewish people and the numbers of each tribe and the names of each tribe and how many men from the age of 20 to 50 were in each tribe in order 20 and above in each tribe to prepare a war, to prepare for a militia. So they needed to know how many men were in each tribe. Okay, now and that's why the book of Bamidbar is called the book of Numbers, because it starts with taking a census, and towards the end of the book of Bamidbar, it also contains a census in Parshas Pinchas. Now, so what does it say? That in the prophet Hosea, who is reflecting upon the number of the Jewish people. The number of the Jewish people will be like the sand of the beach, asher lo yimad v'lo yisafer, that cannot be measured or counted. And then he says, v'haya bimkom asher ye'amer lahem lo ami atem, in the future, instead of God saying, lo ami, that you are not my nation, ye'amer lahem b'nei kel chai. It will be said about them, you are the children of the living God. So this is a prophecy to reassure the Jewish people that there will come a time, even though we are a downtrodden, itinerant nation in exile, there will come a time when we will all be gathered in, and the Jewish nation will be so numerous, will be like the sand on the beach. So I don't know if any of you were present last night at the presentation with Avichai Brodach, who was from Kfar Aza and described these experiences. His family was kidnapped, taken to Gaza for 50 days, and he was injured and recuperating in a hospital. And I introduced his talk with this verse as well. And what's very curious is that this blessing that the Jewish people are going to be so numerous that they're not going to be able to be counted is contained in a number of places in Tanakh. But the analogy varies from place to place. So to your memory, how else have the Jewish people been analogized to something that is countless? Stars. God said to Abraham, Usafor hakochavim im tuchal lispor otam. God said to Abraham, count the stars. God takes Abraham outside and he shows him, he says, look up at the stars, count the stars. You see that you're not able to count them. And God says, Ko yihiyeh zarecha, so shall be your offspring. Right? And this is when Abraham was still childless, right? So Abraham is told that his children will be like the stars. What else have the Jewish people been compared to that is countless? So God tells Yaakov, tells Jacob, V'haya zar'acha ka'afar ha'aretz, your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth. So we have stars, we have dust, and we have sand, which is what we're talking, the prophet here is talking about sand. And there's a special quality to each one of these three metaphors, stars, dust, and sand. Okay, so let's take a look at the Midrash and see what the Midrash teaches us. So the Midrash tells us that Abraham was blessed with having his children analogized to the stars. Then the Midrash says, the Yitzchak nitbarech b'chol. Isaac was blessed with the analogy of sand, because God said, that I will increase your seed like the stars of the sky and like the sand on the beach. Okay? And then Yaakov was blessed that his children would be like the dust of the earth. So, and then the Medrash continues. I'm not going to read the whole thing inside. The Medrash continues and says that later on in biblical text, we find these blessings repeated to show that they came true at different points in Jewish history. So, for example, it says that the blessing of Avraham was reiterated by Moshe when he blessed the Jewish people at the beginning of the book of Devarim. The blessing of Yaakov was reiterated by Bilam in the book of Numbers. And the blessing of Yitzchak, that his children should be like sand, was repeated by the prophet Hosea, which is going to be the topic of our Haftorah. Okay, now let's take a look at the next Midrash, which is over here. So the question is, we still haven't answered the question, why do you need three metaphors when one metaphor would suffice? So the Medrash tells us that stars are different from sand, which is different from dust. What is the difference? Ba'olam hazeh he mishulim ke'afar. In this world where the Jews are downtrodden and persecuted, the Jews are compared to dust. Ma'afar haaretz asui dayish l'chol ba'e olam, because in this world, just like dirt is something that everyone treads upon, kach Yisrael asuyim dayish le'umot ha'olam. So too, in this world, the Jews are trampled by all different manner of nations of the world. That's the fate of the Jews many times in different iterations of Jewish history. we are stepped on. That's just our fate. Another explanation is a more positive explanation. Ma'afar haaretz im eno nimtza ein adam mitkayem im ein afar ein ilanot ve'ein tfua. The Medrash says, even though dirt is something that people step on, but without dirt, you can't have trees, you can't have plants, you won't have vegetables, you won't have produce, and you'll all starve. Kach im ein Yisrael ein ha'olam mitkayem. Similarly, without the Jews, the world cannot exist.
Is afar dust or earth?
Earth, it's earth. Really, afar means both dust and earth. It's the same thing, yeah. So you need soil. So the Jews are compared to soil, okay? Now, then the Medrash continues, and it says, okay, so we know that the dust of the earth represents the Jews in their downtrodden state throughout many iterations of Jewish history. Now, so in Ba'olam Hazeh Mishulim Ka'afar. Okay, now, Liyamot HaMashiach in the Messianic age, He Mishulim L'chol Hayam. The Jews are compared to the sand on the beach. What is the Messianic age? The Messianic age is the gateway period of history that is the ultimate objective of our current existence. It's the utopian existence that happens supposedly in the end of days, that there will come a time when the world will be all at peace. The Jewish people will have a leader called the Messiah, and the world will all assemble in praise of the Jewish people, and this will be a glorious period of world history. And at that time, the Jews will be compared to the sand of the beach. Now, Lama mashlan kechol. So what's the analogy? Ma chol adam notel mimenu melo kimtso v'notein li'isa uletoch hatavshil en kol bria yachol leta'amoshu maked shinav. He says, so the first answer that the Talmud gives, or the Medrash gives, is that if you add a little sand to food, it's totally inedible. And not only that, but if you try to chew on anything that has sand added to it, it's going to break your teeth. Kachem Yisrael kol mishu hu bosizano gozlan ba'olam hazeh hu maked shinav la'atid lavo lamashu hu kodesh. Anyone who tries to attack the Jews, even though they may succeed initially, they're going to end up they're going to end up breaking their teeth. In other words, the Jewish people are like sand. Yes, you may be able to attack them and think that you can digest them initially, but it's not going to work. And then the Midrash gives a second reason. Kechol hayam, ma darko shel chol adam machniso laor umotzio bulin va'osin mimenu klei zuchuchit. There's a second explanation as why the Jews are compared to sand in the Messianic age, as we get closer to the Messianic age, because what do you do to sand? What is sand useful for? So we all know that in the ancient world, how did they make glass? I think they still make glass out of in the modern world as well. How do you manufacture glass? You take sand and you melt it down and you extract blocks of glass. So kach Yisrael nichnasin laor v'yotzein chayim. So too the Jewish people are subjected to the heat of persecution, but the end product is something that is very useful and very helpful to mankind, which is the construction of glass. So the Jewish people are like the glass or the crystal that emerges from that persecution. And that's, again, reflective of the Messianic age. When we look back at the end of Jewish history, and we think back about all of the things that we've undergone and all of the persecution that the Jews have experienced, we'll be able to look at it and say, yes, those were terrible times, but look at what they produced within the Jewish people. And so that's the idea that the Medrash is trying to convey, that that's the Messianic age. And la'atid lavo, mashlan kekochavim. And it's only in the world to come, after this world is destroyed and there's a completely newly created world that's called the world to come, then the Jewish people are compared to the stars. The Jews will sparkle like the stars in the firmament. Yeah. Okay, so like the stars in the sky. So there's a certain untouchability to the stars, something otherworldly to the stars. But in this world, we're either like the dirt that is tread upon, or we're like the sand, which can at least, we can see that it has some utilitarian use. It can take it and produce good things with it, even though it's not something desirable in its natural state. So the Medrash is essentially telling us that these three metaphors present us with three different periods in Jewish history. The only thing that I would add, perhaps, to this idea of the product of sand being glass is that even though this may be somewhat anachronistic to what the prophet is talking about in his time, because people didn't have, I don't know, there is ancient optics where they used glass and crystal and things like that. But so maybe he is making a reference to it. But what does glass help you do? It helps you see better. They didn't have glasses in the times of the prophet, but they might have had rudimentary telescopes. And today it's plastic, but it's the same thing, right? Glass can be polished to help a person see things more clearly. And I think that when the Jews are put into the mix of society, there's a greater sense of clarity. There's a greater sense of perception of good versus evil. There's a greater perception of reality as it is of human behavior. For some reason, the Jews have always been in the center of shining a light on something, just like a magnifying glass can sometimes shine a light more readily on something, can magnify reality. I think that there's something to be said about the Jewish people being compared to the sand, which is the base ingredient for the manufacture of glass. So, and also remember, how is sand itself made? It's the waves hitting against the rocks and eventually breaking down into small particles of sand. And when you think about it, that's a tragedy for the rocks, right? But not necessarily so, because the sand, number one, acts as a buffer for the ocean, and it prevents the water from coming onto dry land. And also, it's a sort of a metaphor for the fact that many times that we may perceive the Jewish people are beaten down, but all that results in us is becoming more multitudinous and granulated into becoming more and more of a people. So there's a lot to say about the sand on the beach. And what the prophet therefore is referring to is not the far-flung future of the world to come, like God promised Avraham, but rather it's the sand on the beach of when we get towards the end of world history, and the world will start to appreciate and understand the role and the function of the Jewish people. That's when we are compared to sand instead of being compared to dirt. Sometimes the world does still think that they can just walk all over us. But we have to make sure that the world remembers that we're not dirt. We may be sand, but we're not dirt. Okay. And the last thing I'll leave you with, just maybe a couple of final ideas. You know how the prophet says over here, instead of calling you that you are not my nation, it'll be said about you, you are the children of the living God. Now, I want you to take a look. It's quite interesting. You are the children of Kel Chai, of the living God. It's a very unusual way of describing Hashem. Why not just say, instead of saying you are not my nation, I will say instead, you are my nation. Okay, you are my chosen people, or however the prophet wants to describe it. Why call us the children of the living God? So the Imrei Emes says something very interesting. The reason why we read this Haftorah right before the Shavuot holiday is because if you look at the numerical value of Kel Chai, guess how much it adds up to? Let's see, Kel is 31, and then add another 9. Add another 18. 31 and 18 is how much?
49.
49. So there's a significance to the number 49, because essentially what we're doing is we are working towards that event of where the Jewish people are all standing at Har Sinai, and we are called B'nai Kel Chai. We are there together experiencing a living God who we have prepared all this time to be able to confront and to meet. So that's the vort of the Imrei Emes, and there may be others who say this. But the last thing that I'll leave you with is the idea from the Shem Yishmuel. He says, Ki eved she'ein l'rabo korat ruach mimenu. Why the Jewish people called the children of the living God? He says, because when you're someone's servant or someone's employee, and the master or the boss is unhappy with that person, va'od lahepochu megarshehu mikeneged panav, then you fire the person, you get rid of them, okay? You dismiss them. Aval ben eno megarshehu la'olam. But if it's your child, no matter how much they misbehave, you're never going to get rid of them. You're never going to just completely dispose of them and say, we're done. Shaharei la'olam nish'ar beno. A child is always a child. Okay? The Hinei Yisrael heim banim lamakom. The Jewish people are children of God. V'alkein afilu b'makom asher ye'omer lahem lo ami atem. And therefore, even when God says, I'm really unhappy with you people, you have not been behaving well. And you're not acting like the nation of Israel. And God is just really fed up with the behavior of the Jews. They've turned towards idolatry. They've turned towards all manner of sinful behavior. Hashem, says, you deserve to be kicked out of the house. Okay? Yomar lahem b'nei kel chai. But instead Hashem says, you know what? As long as I'm alive, says God, you'll always be my children. Ve'en HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitpared mehem, and therefore I will never separate from you. Ve'alkein kol ish afilu hu b'shefel hamatzav ad ma'od. And therefore, no matter how lowly a person has gone in their personal life, in their personal behavior, hayicholet biyado lehitiv ma'asav. Everyone has a chance at redemption. Everyone has a chance of rehabilitation. Ve'el achuzat avotav yashuv. There is nothing that prevents a person from coming back to God. And the previous behavior that I may have acted inappropriately never acts as an impediment. Because just like a parent is always ready to accept you back into their home, right? It may be that, for a time, listen, we need to put some space between us because, you need to find yourself and you need to figure out who you are. But a parent, once the child is ready to come back, always accepts the child back. And that's the reason why Hashem says it's not only when the Jewish people are behaving in an exemplary fashion that they are called my children. You're always my children. By the way, I should note that the prophet Hosea is all about analogizing the Jewish people to God's spouse, not a child. Because the whole story about Hosea was commanded by God to take a wife who was wayward, was misbehaving, and he built a family with her. And then God says, "Okay, now divorce her because she's not a good woman." And Hosea says, "How can I divorce? This is my wife. I built a life with her, right?" And so, by the same token, the second chapter of Hosea says, "A wife you can divorce, but a child can never stop being your child." And so therefore, it's not enough just to analogize the Jewish people to a spouse. The Jewish people also have to be analogized to the children of God, because that creates an indelible, unbreakable bond, no matter what happens in life. Okay, so we're like the sand on the beach. We are God's children. And that should be those words of encouragement that bring us to the giving of the Torah on Shavuot. Somebody had something they wanted to say. Let me just see what that was. Did someone want to comment on something? It looks like I don't see it.
Hi.
Hi.
Prophet. The thing is, you move so swiftly. Thank God that it was relative to the moment, and then, but
Hi Rachel. How are you?
Hi, Rabbi Prophet. Thank God. Wow, I have to say this has been such an amazing hour. So grateful to be here.
It's nice to have you here. You've been traveling a bit, huh?
Yes, and when we landed back here before Leg Bomer, in Toronto, and we've been at the cottage. Everyone's always welcome to visit us at Willow Pond.
Thank
So I'm
you.
looking forward to being in Thornhill for Shavuos, and we're having the annual Shavuos ice cream party at Heatherton Parkette on Wednesday,
Got it?
4 to 6. So
Okay.
thank you.
Should we bring anything to the party?
Just bring yourselves and your friends
Okay.
and loved ones.
Anyone at Heatherton Parkette is welcome to join us. So is it the first day of
Oh,
Shavuot?
and bring your lactate. That was my first day, my first Shavuos party.
Bring your
Everyone's
lactate.
Pick up the
Okay.
lactate. It was so funny.
Okay. And so is this the first day or second day of Shavuot? Just remind me.
It's the first full day. It's Wednesday.
So Wednesday of next week.
Thank you. So looking forward to that.
And is there like a rain day?
Thursday. Okay, I will. I'll send the flyer to Elaine.
Okay. Thanks.
But just don't. Yeah, we're keeping it. I actually wanted to talk to you, Rabbi, because everything is so special, and we want to protect each other. So I wanted to talk to you about just this holy day and coming together, and we've invited the MP, we invited everyone, and
Great.
but we're only inviting specifically through a text or a phone call.
I got you.
We're not putting
Okay.
it out everywhere.
All right. So we better stop talking about it because this is on Facebook. All right. All right, everybody. So have a great week. We won't see you for another 2 weeks. Have a happy Shavuot, Chag Sameach, and we'll see you soon. Take care.